Record.
And can you print me that?
I'm
on.
on.
Like I don't have my
Live.
copy with me.
Hey folks, GDP here. It's busy. We're in New Orleans. We're here for Tales of the Cocktail. Things go crazy in New Orleans.
Write down the Tony recipe
not
for me,
unusual. Everything works out in the end.
Sure.
I know that because I've lived here for several years, and then you sort of get used to the terrible commotion that life in New Orleans is all about, and that's what makes it so much fun. And the music's down, and now I'm going to be really loud. So this is a Sandeman virtual tasting. I'm joined by George Sandeman. George, please. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Nice.
George, you are part of the Sandeman family involved in the wine, port, sherry business since 1790. Is that correct?
Since 1790, absolutely.
So you've got a little bit of a history behind you. One fascinating thing for me, and I know a lot of people are curious, is the port industry is not particularly Portuguese. You've got Sandeman and other producers, and you don't have the Portuguese name. So can you give us a little bit of a background how that happened?
Well, I think there were some really great wines being produced in the north of Portugal, and quite frankly, there were a lot of English wine merchants. Most of them were Scottish, actually, and then Sandeman is from Scotland, and a number of the other families were originated in Scotland, and they discovered these wines and said, well, these are the wines we need to take back to England and to Scotland and drink these wines. And that's how basically all of these families got into the port business.
Fascinating. And port's kind of unusual because you have the port lodges in Oporto.
Exactly.
And you have the wineries that are not at the port lodges. So can you give us a little bit of a background into the logistics of the port wine industry?
Well, you know, they say in port that you need to have, to make good port, you need to have the fire or the heat of the Douro and the fog of the Porto. And it's that heat that brings the grapes up and makes these really great full-bodied wines, lots of color, lots of sweetness in them. That makes for a really good port. And then down in the Porto, right on the coast, about 100 miles away or 150 miles away, you have these really nice complex aging facilities on the river, on the Atlantic coast, where you can age the wines and really make them spectacular.
So the wines get made in the Douro and then you float them down the river.
What you can say is that the wines are made in the Douro and the port is made in the Porto.
Fantastic.
So, there you have it.
And a little bit about port. Because it is made. It's not. It's a wine that has a process.
Exactly. Well, I mean, every wine has a certain process. I mean, you can take grapes, you can ferment them, you can put them in, you can ferment them in barrels, you can ferment them in tanks, you can cold ferment them, and port basically has a process where you stop the fermentation right in the middle, and all of that sugar that you find in the grape, normally natural ingredients of that becomes residual sweet. And through the addition of alcohol, we stop the fermentation and create this wine that is both full-bodied, full of color, full of fruit, and yet very rich in body and rich through some of the
Just to make things clear, the alcohol comes from grape spirits?
Yes, it's absolutely 100% grape spirit. Okay, so we add, basically what we're doing is we're taking grapes that have probably 13 or 14 potential alcohol, we're fermenting them maybe 5 or 6 degrees, and then at that point we're stopping it with neutral wine alcohol. Traditionally it's called brandy, but it has absolutely nothing to do with brandy as we know it, and that's a big confusion. Very many times people are worried about, but it's neutral wine alcohol, and that stops the fermentation.
Okay, we're going to taste some wine in a second. I just have to do one thing. Just have to up the volume a little bit. We're going to taste some Sandeman port. The first one we're going to taste is the Founder's Reserve. Do you have a preference for glasses? Would stemless wine glasses be acceptable?
That's absolutely fine, yeah, absolutely.
Can somebody get us the other ports ready for tasting? We're going to need the 10, the 20, and the bow. So, Founder's Reserve, what style of port is this?
Okay, so Founder's Reserve, I mean, port has there are many people that are confused about the styles of port, and I think it's important to talk a minute about that. Port basically has, like all wines, a red and a white. And then with
I hate to cut you off, but a red and a white, and you're talking about wine, because I'm not that familiar with white port grape varieties. A red port comes from a family of grapes. You're talking about there's a red wine and a white wine. The red wine comes from several fascinating varieties.
It does. I mean, and this to get the structure of what ports are. I think comparing to wines is million. I mean, basically you have red wines and you have white wines, and within the red wines, in normal wines, regular wines, you have red and rosé. Within port, we actually have white ports, which are mostly on grapes, which is quite obvious, and then red port, which is coming in three varieties. There's ruby, which is what we're tasting now. There's cornish, which we're going to taste in a minute, and there's a rosé port, which is a fairly new innovation, which we're not going to taste. It's an interesting thing, and there's still the jury's still out, but it's an interesting.
But I mean, rosé table wine is very popular.
It has to be.
I don't really understand that. Do you find white port has some popularity in that, or is it difficult to sell?
White port is difficult to sell because people tend to think that port is being red. And in fact, there's a great quote which Ben Johnson talks about the fact that first is not so not helpful if you're selling white port or even rosé port. But in the red ports, we basically today we talk about two varieties, two styles. Ruby port, and this is a ruby. Ruby port seems to be very full-bodied, a lot of the original fruit. These are young wines, and this Spanish Reserve is a blended wine. It's a reserve ruby port, 5 years old. So you have a lot of the original. You smell a lot of the original fruit here.
So staticky? You can't hear anything? And yes, we hear you. Kirsty says, it's just lots of background noise. Lots of background noise, folks.
It's New Orleans.
It's New Orleans. What do you want? This is the Big Easy. This is where, let's say the bon temps roulé, and it's let the good times roll here, and we can't stop the music, so we're going to just power through it.
Struggle through.
That's right.
I'll talk louder.
Then talk louder. That'll be a perfect solution.
Okay, so we have ruby ports, and then Founders Reserve is a ruby port, 5 years old, reserve port, lots of fruit, lots of body. It's a blend. So the aim we have here is to make this wine year after year after year after year after year from all of the variations that we have each year, each winter, is to come up with a wine that is essentially identical to the last blend. And that's why it's important. The winemakers are important, but who are really important are the blenders. The blenders are the people who know the stock, they know what they're dealing with, and they're putting together these wines. And they work really hard for it. And they don't get much glory for it. I mean, this is not a glorious job.
They ain't get no glory.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine, you know, a wine like Founders Reserve, and somebody says, well, so what's different about Founders Reserve? And they'll say, nothing. You know, that's the point. You know, exactly.
So, but there's some Founders Reserve has a house style.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's exactly the right point here. That it's the same way as the champagne. The house has a house style, so their group Founders Reserve is a house style. And what is the house style? You say we have lots of fruit, and then in the palate you have to.
There is static. I wonder, is there static always, or just when one or the other of us is speaking, or? Is that hitting red on your song?
Always.
Always on the virtual tasting page. Sorry, folks, you should be muted. Did it just start? Static. So let me see. We'll figure out which one it is. So I've just muted George. So tell me if there's static here or no static. Well, they can hear me. So we're just waiting, folks. We're just trying to figure out where the static is coming from. If there's no static now, we've isolated the it's George. We've isolated the offending mic. I'm waiting on. Here we go, and we still have static. New York, the office in New York. Please let me know. Still here. All right. So now I'm going to check mine. Oh, I know what it is. It's Andy's that's off. That's it. All right, we have to...
I'm on again.
You're on. Let's see. That's it. That was picking up. All right, we figured it out. Andy Seymour's hiding in the shadows. He's going to be coming on later, and he's just going to be quiet for now. So we're back. We're static-free.
Okay.
We're loud. Everything is working absolutely perfectly. This is the way I like life.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the Founders Reserve.
We are back on the Founders Reserve.
So, starting at the beginning, a reserve quality ruby port, 5 years old, and the style of Sandeman is to have lots of fruit, but fruit with a touch of maturity. That gives it a little bit of roundness to it, a little bit of smoothness. But then behind that, a backbone which is made up of good tannins and a good acidity, which makes it very fresh and very clean. And the whole point of the wines that we make are they're vibrant, and that's the balance in between the fruit, the sweetness, the richness that the wine has, and the clean finish to it, and that makes it very, very balanced and very vibrant. So that when you taste it, you go like, my mouth is very clean, my palate's very clean. I want to taste it again.
It's not,
and that's it's not cloying.
Exactly. I was trying to think of a nice way of saying it. It
isn't cloying. And in any sweet wine that ends up being cloying or sugary, it's bad. This is not what you want.
It might be a well-made wine, but it's just
not interesting.
Right.
It's not interesting. You get tired right away. And this is
problem with a lot of dry wines as well.
But a lot of dry wines have residual sweetness.
Well, you need to speak a little louder if you could, George. We're getting.
I'm trying to speak loud.
Getting prompted from our New York office.
Obviously, not New Orleans acclimated yet.
No, not exactly. So there's more acidity in this wine than you would assume, because that's what gives it the balance. This is a sugar-acid balance in here, and it is very fresh, very lively. How old is the Founders Reserve, and has the style remained the same since it was introduced?
The Founders Reserve is a 5-year-old average wine.
About the label.
Oh, the label. Okay, so the label was first introduced in around 1980, 81. It was based on the 1977 wines, which was spectacular vintage. It went off a little bit. I have to be honest. I mean, I think honesty is a very important thing in this business.
It's key.
We varied the style, and the style sort of drifted off a little bit. And then probably at the end of the 80s, 90, we refreshed the wine. And since then, it's been very, very consistent. And we take a lot of care in maintaining that consistency. We go back and taste the wines, samples of the wines that we keep for years, and we keep them in condition so that they stay very stable, and you can taste and you can see the variation of the lots. This is, as I say, blending is all important in this. Consistency.
That to me is fascinating, because you can create a blend that will replicate Founders Reserve on release, but different wines age differently. So I can see the blend sort of diverging with time. Port, famously cellar-worthy wine. Founders Reserve, what happens if you buy a bottle and forget it in the cellar for 10 years?
Well, as with all ruby ports, these young wines are going to evolve, and they keep evolving. And what you're going to find is you're going to lose some of the color. It's going to become more tawny-like. The aromas will change slightly. But when you open it, maybe 10 years after, as long as it hasn't been kept in a place where it's very hot, You know, if it's kept in a regular cellar, you'll find that the wine is not what it was bottled as, but it's something that is very agreeable, very drinkable, very good, because it has the backbone to age.
It does.
Okay, it's not made. When we bottle it, we don't bottle it to be aged, but it has the backbone to age. It has that structure. It has those tannins that are necessary for it to be fresh and yet to help it age.
It's kind of a classic port in that it has the sweet sugar balance, which is really very fine, but it ultimately is a red wine. It has some tannin. It fills the mouth. I mean, for me, the tannins help complete the circle, acid, sugar, tannin. Also, I would imagine when you are serving it with food, all of that comes into play and makes the wine much more food friendly than something that's too sweet, too low in acid, too low in tannin.
There's another great point there. I mean, because if you're serving it with, I mean, you know, as a snack with cheese or with a snack of cheese and bread, it's a great combination. If you're serving it with a chocolate dessert, for instance, it balances chocolate very, very well. I mean, so it has a lot of those attributes that work very, very well with food. And even with, I mean,
how about
I know people.
Savory? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say to
cheese.
you. I know. I was going to say to you. I mean, I have friends who drink Founders Reserve with a steak. You know, I think you really need to be. I mean, be a man's man.
Absolutely.
Steak in the Founders Reserve.
But
maybe
I can
find
see
somebody here.
With game, you know, game often has blackberry sauce or some sort of a fruit sauce. I can see incorporating the wine into the sauce, building that flavor bridge, and it would work very well. I mean, it wouldn't be. It is 20% alcohol, so you want to drink a little bit more slowly, perhaps, than with a table wine.
Or at least be responsible afterwards.
Or stay at home. Do this at home.
Do this at home.
We're professionals.
It's one of those things they say. Leave it. Professionals do this at home.
We're professionals. You do not try this at home. This is a ruby port. It's a great way for people to get an introduction to port. It's sort of the Swiss Army knife of port.
In fact, the way we look at it, this is port. It's the ideal port for people who like port but don't want to have to study about it. You know, you don't have to learn a lot about it. You just buy a bottle of Founders Reserve. You're not going to be disappointed. I know this sounds like a sales pitch, but you buy a bottle, you're not going to be disappointed. You can have it. You can drink a glass. You can drink it over a period of maybe 2 months, a month.
Open bottle.
We recommend, open bottle, we recommend a month, okay? And after a month, you'll have some evolution, some tiring.
So it'll become a little nutty. It'll become
exactly.
Oxidative. It's not like it's not like it's a month and boom. No,
it doesn't go bad.
But it starts to change, obviously.
Exactly. I mean, unlike if you were to hold a red wine for a month, you'd find that at the end of a month it would
be vinegar if you're lucky.
Yeah, exactly, vinegar. With Founders Reserve, you don't. I mean, you have something that's a little bit maybe more faded, but very drinkable. But if you drink it within a month, that's absolutely fine. Drink it chilled. This is great. I mean, where you keep it cool. Drink it on ice. All that stuff.
You might think this is blasphemy, and forgive me, but in the summertime, don't mind it with some mineral water and some ice, a little slice of orange. It makes a fantastic cocktail. Is it okay to have port with port sauce, or too much? From a Ling Prof, one of our regular users, who probably has her friend Yvonne sitting next to her, Yolanda, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong person. Yolanda's sitting there, and they're both drinking port and having a blast in California. So,
is it okay to have port with port sauce?
What else would you have?
I think so, definitely.
What else would you have?
Definitely.
So this is a ruby port. We're going to move on and try the Vow vintage port. Here's a 2000 vintage. Tell us a little bit about what we've got going on here.
Well, Vow Vintage is 100% vintage port. It's a full approved vintage port, but it's what we like to think of, and if you talk about blasphemy, this is one of those blasphemous things. We like to think of this as vintage port ready to drink. The whole thing with vintage port has always been, they're great years. You have to keep them forever. You keep all sorts of stuff going on, and this is all good and all good for people who enjoy that. But if it's a question of keeping the wine for 25 years and then drinking it in 24 hours, there's no reason why in between you shouldn't drink wines, these vintage ports, when they're young or as they're aging. And that's what we've made Val Vintage. It comes from our farm in the Douro region, in the Cima Cordo, so right in the center of the Douro.
That's a great...
It's and it's right in one of the sort of best growing regions. We have here one of the key varieties in port making, and we've concentrated on this variety for making this port. And the style that it comes out is lots of fruit, softer tannins, more integrated tannins, and an easier evolution. So as it ages, the wine is actually very drinkable, young or as it ages. And that's what we've tried to do here with Val Vintage.
So this is the 2000 vintage.
It's 2000 vintage.
And
you can smell it.
When was this released? This smells fantastic.
Two years after, so like a classic vintage port, 2 years after the vintage. So 2000 released in 2002.
So this is not the current release?
No, this was it was bottled in 2002.
Oh, okay.
Released after 2002. And it's what we currently have in the marketplace.
It smells.
It's
fantastic.
It's beginning to develop those wonderful classical vintage port aromas. So this is a wine that anybody that finds it and can buy it, I have to say, I recommend it because it is really the vintage port to drink right now.
Tastes like. It smells. I get a lot of licorice. I get a lot of prune, plum. Cherried fruit, a little spicy. There's a lot going on. I was surprised how much was going on actually on the nose.
And when you taste it in the mouth, you still have all these tannins there. But they're softer, integrated tannins.
It's
the fruit
velvety.
comes through. It's velvety. Still has a lot of time to go. If you want to keep it for another 4 or 5 years or 10 years, you can do that. But really nice to drink that. And if I can tell you how I drink this at home, because in the summertime, we tend to drink a lot more white wine. It's normal. You drink more white wine. It's hot.
Of course.
Okay. And so at the end of a dinner or something, and you're eating fish, drinking white wine, you say, I really feel like some red wine. And I've put this in the fridge at home, so it's nice and chilled. And I serve it in big Riedel Bordeaux glasses. Okay. And I bring it out and I give it to people. Here's the red wine, and they all go like, what is this wine? I never tasted this. You say, and then they start tasting it. They go like, what is it? Is it port? And you go, yeah. You can't drink port like this.
Of course not. Blasphemy.
And then they all drink it. It's great.
But
that's good.
That's part of what we're all trying to do is to break down rules that are kind of silly.
Yeah, exactly.
You can drink port out of gigantic Riedel glasses out of the fridge in the summertime, and you still need to be louder. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm just not a loud guy.
You're just not a loud guy. But this is definitely. I'm impressed by the wine. It's young, it's youthful, it's rich, and then but it finishes with great fresh fruit. I would like to age this for a while. But for my palate, it would smooth out a little bit, and I see that promising freshness on the finish that makes me feel very comfortable saying you can put this away in the cellar for another decade and be very happy with where this goes.
We didn't make this wine. And that's why the packaging is different, and that's why it's got this big V on it for Val Vintage and all this sort of fairly sort of decorated look on it. We did this on purpose because we wanted people to understand this is not the classic vintage port. This is a really good vintage port, but it's something that you can drink, not every day, but more frequent, every week. You don't have to wait for the big things.
So, open bottle of Val Vintage, how long do you say?
Well,
this gets sticky.
It does get sticky because a lot of it depends on the age of the wine. You know, I mean, if you're talking about really old vintage ports, we always said 24 hours. You know, don't keep it for more than 24 hours once it's open. But I think, you know, with Val Vintage, probably 2000, you can keep it open for maybe 2-3 days. If you decant it, and I've done this at home, I've decanted it and kept it, and you know, you go drinking it over 3 or 4 days.
It changes somewhat, right?
It tends to sort of evolve slightly. Maybe the aromas aren't so intense, you know, but it still tastes really good, and it's still very potent. So it's really good.
Since we were talking about breaking rules and things like that, Julia Crowley asked, "Is any glass proper for port?" I mean, I'm old enough to remember very silly glasses for a whole series of wine, and I remember, and maybe it's the traditional port glass, that port was served in rather small glasses when I started to get involved in wine, and I didn't understand it then because you're just locking in the aromas, you're locking everything in. We've come a long way. We're drinking them out of stemless white wine glasses,
Exactly.
which actually, I mean, if you look at this, I would say this is not a bad type of glass for port.
I think this is a very good glass for port. I have to say that to answer the question, any glass that has a big enough bowl to it where you can really get the aromas out of it, out of the wine, because a lot of the times traditionally people didn't smell port, you know, they just drank it. Any glass is a good glass. I mean, any glass, any wine glass, a white wine glass, a red wine glass. The new port glass that was recently developed is a larger port glass, and that all works well because port is a wine and it needs to be looked at as a wine. The tradition of drinking port in the old small glasses was something that was very Victorian, and in fact it was the Victorian era that brought these small glasses in, where the port would literally be passed around the table and it would be drunk very much like shots. I mean, you'd pour the small glass, it'd be a full glass like this, and you'd pretty much drink it. You wouldn't look at it, you wouldn't appreciate it from the aromatic standpoint. You just drink it.
Throw it back in the bottle, and then you fall around.
And until you fell off the chair, and then
that
was it. That was
your night is over because you're on your back on the chair. We're going to find out BHW Colleen. I'm going to find out what the retail prices are for all these. I don't have them on my hands, but we're going to get them. We'll be talking about them over the course of the evening. So you made a point there. Port is a wine. So just thinking of it as a wine, when you're putting it in a wine glass, make sure it's big enough. Do you have any preference, Burgundy stem, Bordeaux stem? Because that ultimately is what most people have in their house.
I mean, I think I tend to have at home. I tend to have Bordeaux style glasses, and I think a Bordeaux glass works really well.
I would agree.
A largish glass. You don't have to fill it up the same level as you put wine in, but you put a decent dose in there.
I've been sipping at this, but this is, that's all we have in there. That gives a lot of room for the aromas to expand and fill the glass. And
yeah, exactly. And you can really taste it. The acidity on this and the finish on this is really very good.
Beautiful wine.
It's showing very well, I have to say.
What does VOW stand for?
Well, VOW, VOW is the name of the farm. It's Quinta do VOW.
And Quinta
is a farm, and VOW is the name of the farm. And actually, VOW, a VOW in Portuguese is a ford. It's a crossing place in a river. And it was the only thing I had to say when we launched this wine, which came from this farm and based on Touriga Franca, which is
based on Touriga Franca.
Based on Touriga Franca, which is not the great variety of port is Touriga Nacional.
Sure.
But the Franca is a really nice variety. It has lots of aromas and a lot of softness, and we based it on this, which at VOW we have a good plantation of.
Is there a significant flavor profile difference between Nacional and Franca?
Yeah, there is. I mean, Franca has a lot more structure and intensity to it, whereas Nacional has a lot more structure and intensity to it, whereas Franca is softer. It's more aromatic. and it's a little bit rounder in the wines that it makes.
So
they're
it makes
more integrated. So it's much better for this
sort
side
of
of wine.
easy, approachable style.
And that's what we decided to do with this. Now, this didn't mean we didn't stop making the classic vintage.
Stay
ports.
facing the camera.
Sorry.
People want to see you.
We didn't stop making the classic vintage ports. We kept on making classic vintage ports, but it seemed to us that while people were aging their classic vintage ports, they wanted to drink something else.
Yes,
you know,
it makes perfect sense.
This is a sort of, it's an old-fashioned idea, you know.
So this is
it.
a mid-term aging vintage port.
Exactly.
While your long-term ports. Speaking of vintage port, what's the last few declared vintages so people know?
We made it 2007, and I have to say that the Sandeman 2007 was made by our winemaker Luis Sotomayor, who I can tell you firsthand won in the international wine competition yesterday, was the Fortified Winemaker of the Year, which is an international thing. And Luis is a great winemaker. And he made the 2007, which I think was, in the tastings that I've done, I have to admit, I mean, we had to be honest with these things. It wasn't the #1 vintage, but it was definitely the #2 vintage of the 2007.
Okay.
Although, if you look at all the critics, maybe they didn't look at it that way, but that's cool. That's okay. He'll get there. He'll get there. But 2007 is a classic vintage. It's for laying down for many years. And before that, you know, we have some 2003 and 2000. 2000 was a nice vintage. I mean, we're talking the Vow vintage here, and we made a classic vintage as well. But you know, it was also made because it was the year 2000.
It's a beautiful number.
It was a good number. It was a good number. Coincided with a reasonably good year.
Do you find that the year is? I happen to like 2000 vintage ports because they seem to be maturing a little more quickly. Mm-hmm. They're less imposing than the greatest years for me are. You sort of wonder, am I going to live long enough to enjoy this wine? So.
Yeah,
sometimes
there is a bit of that. I think. I mean, you know, traditionally, when people used to drink a lot of vintage port, wine drinkers would buy classic years for laying down.
For your children, for your grandchildren.
For your children, your grandchildren, for a long time, and then have non-classic years, which would evolve faster, and that's what you were drinking while your classic years were.
That's what the Vow is.
And that's where Vow fit in, and that's for us where, you know, it was part of our thinking when we introduced the Vow.
You saw an empty niche in the marketplace, and it needed filling.
That, and it was I mean, it hasn't been an easy explanation for many people.
I can understand that.
But it was the best way to explain that, you know, you can have classic vintage and you can have ready-to-drink vintage.
I think it's a fabulous idea.
I think it works.
If it was ready-to-drink vintage, I think it definitely suits my buying style. But when I tasted this, the first thing that I thought about was, wow, this is a wine to look for on a restaurant wine list. It's probably fairly priced, particularly compared to a vintage port at the same level of maturity. So this is something definitely to look out for. Just to tune in all you latecomers, I'm here joined by George Sandeman. I don't know what generation you are in the Sandeman family. Is it I thought it was 7, but it's from 1790, the 7th generation. Yeah. We're tasting ports. We're taking your questions, and we're just learning about port and the whole history of port. This is a very interesting question. Danica Stitz asked, how much of the fruit is estate and how much is outsourced? And I imagine that the answer depends on which wine we're talking about.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that we can say that of our premium wines, so the wines that we've been tasting and we're going to taste here, to allow me a small legal variance here, I'd say 99% of it is from our own estates. Oh. We have very good and extensive vineyards in the Douro region. And then we also, because the outsourcing is done from farmers who we work with, and in very many cases with farmers who we work with for generations. For generations. So we're bringing in their fruit and making the wines. So, you know, it's a great majority of the fruit. Now, I mean, this doesn't mean that, you know, every now and then we're not buying lots of wines, because farmers who will make their own wines will come to us with a very good lot of wine and say, hey, that's good. You know, we'll take that. We'll buy that.
We have a space for it.
You know, we have it, yeah, for what we're looking for. So I say the great majority. I mean, in the premium wines, 99%. In overall, I mean, probably in the 80s, in the 80%, in between farmed and contracted farming vineyards that we've been working for a long time. So it's a lot of the wine.
We have a question there. So, speak to the versatility of port. Some see it as a dinner, fireplace, cool season wine. I mean, you know, we're going to talk about the versatility, but for me, there's very few times that are better. And this is what I like to do. In all honesty, I like to sit in the backyard in October, November, roast chestnuts, have port. It's 52 degrees out if you're lucky. Port is naturally chilled. You're eating chestnuts, you're drinking port. Some people like cigars with port. I'm not a huge fan. I think it ruins the port. I'd rather enjoy the port. We'll see what your opinion is on that. So I don't want to push that too far off everybody's radar, but port is more versatile than that. You don't have to be sitting outside in the cold weather to drink it.
I agree. I mean, you know, there were a lot of people for many years that thought you had to have a sort of large dinner and be dressed in a tuxedo with you know, yeah, or a drinking coat or a smoking jacket to enjoy port. And I think that we've gone past that, and we know that, you know, port has this variety of flavors. I mean, whether it's the rubies with their big fruit, you know, which is really delicious, and you can drink chilled, or you can drink, you know, room temperature, after dinner, before dinner. I mean, a lot of the wines are drunk in the world. You know, I mean, in France and Belgium, which are two markets that drink a lot of port, drink it as aperitif, and almost exclusively as aperitif. You know, if you then look with those versus, you know, the tawny ports, where you can, and we're going to be tasting now, we're going into the tawny ports. Port has an enormous number of flavors to it, and with those flavors you can really combine lots of different occasions. If you enjoy drinking it with, you know, roasting chestnuts and fireplaces, nothing wrong with that at all. If you enjoy cigars, and I do enjoy cigar, I have to tell you, I do enjoy a cigar with port, I have to say. I don't exclusively enjoy cigars with port or port with cigars. That works perfectly well. But if you want to have, you know, a ruby port with a chocolate mousse or a chocolate cake, you know, it's absolutely fine. I mean, and it's not only fine, it's a great combination.
Sure.
Or tawny ports with, you know, creme brulee, or with, you know, a shrimp vol au vent. It works absolutely perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's there's all these flavors. The problem is and this is the old thing of, you know, it's wine. I mean, you know, in the old days people would say it's, you know, it's red with meat, and it's white with red with fish, white with fish. Nowadays,
keep on turning you a little bit, so
white. I mean, today we're talking about wines, and people have discovered that in fact there is a lot of stuff going on, and you don't have to be tied down by convention. You know, and that's what it's all about, really.
So let's talk. This is a 10-year tawny.
This is a 10-year-old tawny.
Here's a great point of confusion. I know that a lot of people buy this and say, "Oh, this is a bottle of 10-year-old wine." But this is going back to house style, just like the Founder's Reserve has a house style. This is a style of wine that's, I don't know if designed is the right word, but it's blended to resemble a 10-year-old.
Yeah, I think there you're taking what is the legal definition. Okay, unlike Scotch, when you say, you know, it was a 12-year-old Scotch, it's the minimum age is 12. You know, in port, if it says 10, it's the average age is 10. So not every drop of that port is 10 years old, but the average is, and that means that while you might have wines that are 9 years old, you're also going to have wines in there that are 12 years old.
But the goal here, of course, is to have a consistent
Style.
product.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
This is a blend,
Yeah.
and what you want is for somebody to say, well, this is delicious. 5 years later, I'm going to go back and buy another bottle, and it's going to be delicious because it's very similar. And that's what you're shooting for.
I think one has to understand the difference in between tawnies and rubies here. You know, with ruby port, our objective is to keep the freshness. With tawny ports, our objective is to use oxygen, so aeration, to create this this style, which is a little bit more evolved.
I don't know if you can see, but tawny, I mean, the color is definitely turns tawny.
Tawny, exactly.
This is 10-year tawny, so it's still pretty.
It's got touches of ruby in it. I mean, you start in the 10-year-old, you start to get the amber colors and the yellow coming through, but it's still got a lot of red amber in it. When we get to the others, when we get to the 20-year-old, you'll find that all that amber has now gone from red into yellow and gold. So you can see the age and the way that the wine is moving forward, and the complexity too. I mean, whereas in ruby ports you got all this sort of fresh, plummy, strawberry characteristics in here, red cherry, all of these things. In tawny ports you have dried fruit, almonds, raisins coming through, a little bit of vanilla, much more complex. Lighter in color, but much more structured.
And I find it lighter, a little lighter in body without all that fruit. This is silky compared to the velvety Vow.
It is, but I'm going to tell you something. I mean, and this I think is the way to see the strength of the wine. If you were to eat, I mean, if you were to drink this with a Roquefort cheese, or a cheese similar to Roquefort, which is a very strong, powerful blue cheese, lots of salt in it, and very tough on wine, this wine will stand right up to that. Okay. Whereas if you were to have what looks like a more powerful wine, a full-bodied ruby port, it would kill the ruby port.
That's fascinating.
And I mean, these wines look delicate, but they're massively well structured.
So a lot of this has to do with balance, because for me, balance
Again,
in wine
balance.
can make a wine seem deceptively light and elegant when it really is rich and powerful. It's a like I said, beautiful wine. This for me is silky,
yeah.
and it has a lot of depth and complexity. It's very aromatic in the mouth.
Very full, I mean, still quite full-bodied, you know, but you see very evidently, you see that the change in the character of the wine between, I mean, for instance, the Vow vintage, which is, you know, is from 2000. Age as a ruby port, which aged in bottle,
about the same
age. Whereas here, aged in small barrels, 500-liter barrels, racked off once a year. You know, so a lot of aeration going on, a lot of controlled oxidation, that's the key. That's the key. And yet you can see the difference in the style here. I mean, there's, in the flavors of the wine. One full-bodied, another more delicate, but much more structured in the wine. Great wines.
It is a great wine, and this again is made the same way as the Founders Reserve and the Vow vintage. It's a fortified wine. We had a question from somebody late arriving. The wines are fortified with grape spirits, which once upon a time were referred to as brandy. But it's more grape alcohol, stops the fermentation,
absolutely
leaves the sugar in.
77% alcohol.
77% alcohol.
Yeah, this is the key thing, because you can, you know, alcohol you can distill, grape alcohol you can distill to 96%, but we use it 77% because we believe, and pretty much it's proven that at 77%, when you stop the fermentation, it doesn't burn the fruit.
Oh, interesting.
And that's what we're working with at the moment. Yeah.
So there's a lot of subtleties,
subtle technicalities
learned over the 200 plus years that you've been playing with this. You mentioned 500-liter barrels. These are new barrels, used barrels. You
always used barrels, okay? Because one of the things we want is we want to use the barrel as a container in which we literally oxidize the wine. And you know, normally we talk about oxidizing something is bad. That's
a terrible thing. Stop that.
But I mean, in two regions, I mean, you know, if you're making tawny ports or if you're making Madeira and if you're making sherry, okay, you actually want the barrel to act as a form of getting air to the wine in a controlled way.
Sure.
And that's what we use these barrels for.
So you don't want to add any flavors, tannins.
Exactly.
It's just a neutral air transfer device.
There's always a little bit. I mean, you always find in tawnies a touch of vanilla coming from the oak because it's
American oak.
It's American. We call them American oak, but in fact, I mean, most of the oak is white oak of the American oak
variety,
but also found in Central Europe. So in the old days, it was more American oak. Even today, there is some, but there's a lot of Central European oak as well.
It's fairly neutral oak out of Central Europe. Cold forests, tighter grain than American oak. So.
Right. Yeah. It's okay. It's not as. I mean, it's for instance, it's not a hard as oak or hardened influence as the French oak.
Mm-hmm.
You know, French oak has a much more significant influence. But anyway, we're using barrels that have been used first for winemaking, then for aging young ruby ports, and then when the barrels are fully seasoned, we then age them. We use them for aging tawnies.
So this is a good question. This is a fascinating question, I think, in the context of tawnies. Julia Crowley has a friend who's asked what grape varieties are typically used in the manufacture of port. And I was wondering what they are and if they're different. I mean, we already know Tinta Franca for the vows. I was a little surprised by that. You expect Nacional, but what are the tawnies made with, and are they any different from, say, Founders Reserve?
Well, it's more than the selection of varieties for specific port making, or at least in the case of the tawnies. What we've found some 25, 30 years ago was that there were 5 key varieties of red varieties which work very well, of which probably the 2 best known, Touriga Nacional and Touriga Franca. Tinta Roriz is also used, and Tinto Cão and Barroca. These are the 5 varieties. When this was established, like all rules, somebody comes along and says, these are the 5 varieties, and everybody started planting those varieties. But the reality is that our vineyards still have all of the old varieties, and maybe 50, 60 varieties from the past. And over time, we've learned that, yes, these varieties are the best varieties, but within the ones that were not classified 25 years ago, we also find other varieties. Tinta Amarela, for instance, okay, which is a variety that people have suddenly said, oh, well, this actually is a variety that works very well.
Pretty good, eh?
So what have we learned is, we've learned that, yes, there are some key varieties that you can plant, but yes, the ancients, if you want to call them that, the people in the past, 200 years ago.
Louder.
Sorry,
more complaints.
The people in the past, 200 years ago, learned that having a vineyard with mixed varieties actually produced better wines, because varieties are subject to the growing season and the location.
And the vagaries of each.
And if you look at the Douro, I mean, the Douro it's not one microclimate. We classify it into 3 macroclimates. But then within each macroclimate, every hill and every curve is a microclimate.
So curve, just to explain, the Douro is a valley, it's a river valley. You have terrace vineyards going down the sides. So what is the elevation difference between the top of vineyards and the bottom?
God. That's a
couple hundred meters?
Yeah.
300, 400 meters?
Yeah, 300, 400.
So we're going to say 300, 400 meters, which is significant, 1,200 feet. So the lowest vineyards really are under completely different growing conditions than the highest vineyards.
Yeah, and it's worse than that, because it spreads. I mean, you know, basically 300 kilometers, all the way from the middle of the Douro or you know, the middle of Portugal, basically, all the way up to the Spanish border. So you have completely different climatic conditions, which vary every year. So I mean, here you're talking about, I mean, you know, it's hundreds, if not thousands, of microclimates. It's not like growing in Bordeaux or in Champagne, where you sort of know where the microclimate is and how it works. I mean, here you have all of these different things going on. So one year you can get really great Touriga Nacional growing in one area that next year did really badly. So this combination of grape varieties is really important.
So there's a combination of grape varieties. Do you also have a combination of estates throughout the Douro?
Exactly.
So
this also is the case.
It's a gigantic jigsaw puzzle.
It really is. It really is, and that's what makes it. I mean, the Douro is very complicated anyway. It's a wonderful region. If you've never visited, it's absolutely. There are no photos, there are no videos that do it justice. I mean, when you go up from up to Pinhão, which is in the center of the middle of the Douro, and you look around and you see vineyards planted everywhere. And then from there, you go up to the highest mountain that there is, and you look around and all you see is vineyards planted, and you say, how the hell did they plant a vineyard there? And that's the Douro. It's enormous work of love.
When you see a vineyard and you go, how the hell did they plant a vineyard there? Are those older vineyards? Were
Not always. I mean,
always.
Sometimes they're younger vineyards. You know, there's been a lot of conversion of vineyards in the last decade. You know, and some of the old vineyards that were split up and on different terraces have been now sort of, you know, made into more workable economic vineyards. But you find people who've got pieces of land, you know, in what seems to be impossible places to get to.
Nothing's
and have planted
impossible.
vineyards. Nothing is impossible.
Somebody's got a dream they're going to plant
It's true.
vineyards there.
It's true.
I'm going to just move on to the 20-year-old Tawny, and somebody's asked if we can give a cheese recommendation for people who do not like blue cheeses, which is an excellent question because not everybody likes blue cheese. So do you have a preference? And do you have a preference for, I mean, you mentioned Roquefort and Ruby would not be a great pairing, but Roquefort and Tawny would be. So are there specific cheeses that work better with different styles that are maybe not blue cheeses?
I think any cheese, I mean, any creamier cheese works well with a Ruby port. So I mean, if you like a brie or camembert style cheese, you know, and I know that, I mean, you know, in the United States there are a lot of great cheeses now, artisanal cheeses that are being produced, and all the creamy cheeses work very well with these. People tend to think of, you know, a Stilton as an English cheese, but with port, Stilton and port. Oh, that's the big thing to do. But Stilton is actually quite a creamy cheese. It's not a strong blue cheese. And so, I sort of include, I mean, with all due respect to the blue cheese non-lovers, I think, you know, that anything that has cream, soft characteristics works very, very well. Anything that's really salty, so, I mean, if you had a Parmesan style
sweet,
cheese,
salty thing,
you know, works really well with Tawny port. And Tawny ports work really well with very strong cheeses, very full flavored, very salty cheeses, the same way as it works really well with a fresh peach. And, you know, a fresh peach has terrible acidity for wine. I mean, it would kill a lot of wines. And Tawny ports stand up really well. And it sort of shows the flexibility that you have in these wines.
Testament to Tawny port that it pairs well with a fresh peach.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, it's very difficult to pair, generally to pair fresh fruit and
it,
wine.
They
don't like each other. This is a fascinating question. We got a question out there. Do you have any favorite scotches that have been aged in port barrels?
Well, this is a touchy subject. And it really is a touchy subject because there.
Be very careful what we say. They're women with crossbows over here.
I won't say that there are any favorite scotches, or in fact Irish whiskies which have been aged in port barrel. But yeah, there are some. The touchy subject is this: about 4 years ago, the controlling body for port, which is the Port Wine Institute, decided that they would move against any whiskey company using the fact that they'd aged in port barrel on a label. And this was something that I personally butted heads with the president of that institute, saying that it's probably one of the most stupid things that they could do. But unfortunately they did. And so nowadays there are scotches and Irish whiskies aged in port barrels, and we in fact supply some, but increasingly they're not allowed to say on the label.
They're all
or at
very
least
good.
In Europe. In
the U.S. maybe,
Europe.
but they're all very
in
good.
In the U.S. they can say it on the label because
we see that very frequently.
Yeah.
So we're drinking the 20-year tawny. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what people should expect from a 20-year tawny, particularly vis-a-vis a 10-year?
Again, here you have something that, I mean, it all depends on house style. And there are 20-year-old tawnies that have a lot of fruit from the original style, from the original fruit, and there's the style that we have. And the style that we have is a style that has a fair amount of evolution. So we rack off quite frequently during the 20 years. Frequently is once a year, and that evolves the wine. And so what we like is we like this.
Louder.
We like this wine with this very nice amber color, gold amber, yellow highlights in it, and a lot of flavor. Very clean, very crisp, very long in the mouth. It lasts a long time in the mouth. Very fresh for a wine that is 20 years old.
And much more elegant.
Very elegant.
It's
very
really,
nice.
it's a very interesting transition that you see from velvety to silky to very elegant, fine, gentle and balanced. So we have the prices just to go through everything. We tried the Founder's Reserve, which retails for $20. The Vow, which is $41.99. The 10-year is $30, $29.99. The 20-year is $51.99. The 30-year is $86, which we're not trying, and the 40-year is $140, which we're also not trying for obvious reasons. But I would love to try them one day. But we're trying the tawny here, and this is part of one of the activities you're doing here at Tales of the Cocktail, where you're introducing cocktails.
Exactly.
Port cocktails. We have Andy Seymour, who's going to be joining us right here. If you can come over here, you can come to my right and get on camera here. Beverage Alcohol Resource.
That is correct.
You're here for Tales of the Cocktail?
I'm here for Tales of the Cocktail. Actually, well, this particular segment that we're doing is part of a, in addition to being part of this great education about port, it's part of a larger program that is run by Pernod Ricard called Bar Smarts, which is, well, that's Beverage Alcohol Resource. That's our company, created this program called Bar Smarts, which is really just kind of designed to help bartenders learn more about their craft, about the spirits and wines that go into making these great drinks, and then, you know, how to know more about them, how to do it better. So that's the program we've created.
So you make cocktails with port. Let's talk about, I mean, how do you get inspired? When you thought, when you were first tasked with making cocktails with port, did you just jump in and start making cocktails, or did you say, let me think about what I'm working with here?
Well, I mean, it's there's so many answers to that question. I'll start it with this. Well, when I got into bartending, I didn't think about a lot. I just tried to get a drink out fast. And then as I learned more about the craft, what you start to see is that there's a great history to port in cocktails. If you look at the classic cocktail books and look at the old recipes, port plays a great role in a lot of them. And that's what you start to understand is, again, we talking with George about the idea of how important and how, you know, how estimable these beverages are, and the great reverence that they should have, and of course they should. And I think in some senses we tend to think about that and take it too seriously, and not remember that, you know, when we're going to think about what we want to put into a cocktail, you know, there are a lot of things that can go into a cocktail. And if I'm going to make a cocktail, I want it to have great ingredients in it. I want it to have magical flavors that I'm maybe not going to just get from picking up some, you know, random stuff that I have in my speedwell. So I'm always looking for new inspiration. So it's both equal parts, you know, the history and tradition of where cocktails come from, and the new kind of the new golden age that we're in now of cocktails. We're bartenders, mixologists, whatever you want to call them. We're looking for inspiration. We're trying to find new flavors, new profiles, new ways to expand the palate.
New and old. I mean, it's kind of interesting because you said going back however long, the old books, they had them there. So
Absolutely.
You're really being inspired by history.
Well, I mean, you know, that's what we do. I mean, how much original thought is there? I think isn't there only 7 real movie plots, and then and then you can.
I think
then
there's 6.
And then,
You're using your imagination.
And then there's the one. Yeah. Anyway.
I understand completely. I worked in a kitchen. You very rarely invent something entirely new.
Exactly.
You get inspired and you interpret.
Well, and part of what's great about cocktails is it doesn't. I mean, yes, there are rules, there are techniques, there are basic formulas, but there really is no limit to what we can do. There really is no limit to the ingredients that we can use. Now, I mean, port happens to be one that has a tradition. But again, as we look to today's bartenders, they may not know that tradition. They may think that they're just trying something that they found on their back bar that they've been staring at for a couple months while they've been working in this place. What is that? And that is where a lot of inspiration comes from. And now, through programs, like Bar Smarts and other things like that, I think people are starting to, take the idea of the ingredients in the cocktails, giving it a little more thought.
A little bit more serious.
Hopefully not too
That's
serious.
Serious, wrong word.
Exactly,
word.
no.
A little bit more thought. You said it better than I did.
I think it goes both ways. Yes.
More careful.
Well, it's okay to take what you're crafting seriously, as long as you don't take yourself seriously, because this is, after all, food and drink. And
I'm going to cut that and loop that a couple of times.
Well, I've been into a few bars where as a guest, it was not my show, it was theirs.
Yes.
And that's one of my pet peeves.
Absolutely one of mine too. So you're going to make 2 cocktails for us.
We're going to do cocktails is a relative term. We're going to do a couple of things. And I want to talk through a whole bunch of ideas and hopefully get some great questions too. One of the things that that Snoothadmin is focusing on is the Founders Reserve. The Ruby Port is.
So just to cut you off for 1 second.
Please, cut me off.
I'm going to cut you off.
I've been cut off before.
I can imagine.
Hi-oh. Anyway.
So we're talking about port, but really you've got a variety of ingredients to choose from, and we're focusing on the Founders Reserve, which is a fruitier, slightly more opulent and simple fruit delivery of flavors. But you have 3 or 4 different styles of port to choose from.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about port, we're actually talking about a specific port used for a specific person.
Correct.
Purpose,
people.
We're
all having a good time.
Just for you. Just for you. So we're Founders Reserve. That's where we're starting.
Well, I mean, the reason that we start there and the reason that it's a good place to kind of hang out for a little bit as opposed to just starting and moving on is that it's, when you think about Ruby Port and you think about the flavor profile of what it brings to the table, the fruit, the spice, it brings a lot in terms of a cocktail ingredient. I know that George would kind of agree with me on that. Please agree with me on that one.
Agree very much.
We talked about it before. He said he would agree with me.
This is
no
the
matter
time.
what I say.
This is the time to agree.
No, but the whole idea is that something like that, it's young, it's fresh, it's vibrant, it's going to lend a really exciting quality and an extra flavor profile, depth, layers. I mean, when I talk about cocktails, I talk about balance is my key component, and then my next kind of 1A type of thing is complexity or layers or texture.
It's the same. Those are the same vocabulary that wine people use.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we want to experience.
Well, I mean, it's not rocket science, and I'd love to say that I was the guy who came up with that. But balance and texture, I mean, these are kind of basic standards of what we're looking for when we eat, when we drink, and therefore, if you can find ways to add in layers, to add in complexity, to add in texture, without necessarily having to add a million ingredients, I understand the need, and there is a need and a purpose for the 9, 10, 12 ingredient cocktail. Absolutely. If you want to go off and go crazy, that's fine. It serves a purpose. But I really love getting back to drinks that can be made in simple ways.
At
with
home,
simple ingredients. Well, at home, exactly. I mean, at home, it's almost, it's kind of you get both sides of that. Because at home, you do probably have a stock pantry with spices and herbs and things like that, and you go to the store and you can do whatever you want, and that's, so you can go off, and you can just, I hope that you are having fun and playing and doing whatever you want, because there really are no rules to being a bartender, especially at home. Because if it's not that good, the drain's right there,
That's
and
right.
away it goes.
And nobody's paying for it. You're not charging for anything.
Nobody saw this. The boss can't get mad. So yes, you can play around at home. But to your point, simplicity at home, the ability to just make an easy cocktail or mix up a pitcher of cocktails so that you can just have something ready to go when your guests come over, beautiful afternoon, evening cocktail party, whatever it might be. Keeping it light, keeping it fresh, going to something like port and having it like a unique ingredient, because I don't people think about cocktails, they think about kind of straightforward what they're used to getting. They may not be thinking about port.
So Let's make a port cocktail.
Well, okay, let's start with something really basic that I'm pretty sure everybody
everybody out there can do this.
even my mom, who's always asking me, wait, what do you do? Can you tell me again what you do? I'm like, Mom, we've done this.
My mother asked me the
We've
same
done this before.
Yeah, we've done this a few times. So anyway, what we're going to do is we'll call it a cocktail for the purposes of what we're doing here. Where will it be seen? Can
That's
people
the
see it
camera.
there? So you.
That is a glass full of crushed ice.
That is a glass full of crushed ice. Watch, it gets hard. I'm going to take that. Oh, here we go.
It'll look fabulous.
We're going to do the Snoothadmin Founders Reserve, and we're going to pour it over that ice. That was difficult. I mean, wait.
We're not done.
Some would say that's enough, and they'd be right. But wait, what
We're
if
not
you
done.
also had a delicious orange slice to slide in there, and
Ta-da!
you also thought
Brilliant.
to yourself, well, orange is delicious, but what about when orange and mint get together? That's a party, I think,
That is
is
a
what we're
party.
talking about, Greg. So we can just mint sprig it up, and
Ooh.
I told you,
Oh,
I
you
told
can
you,
smell that.
I told you I like simple cocktails.
Anybody can make this, and actually,
You've officially got a simple cocktail.
this
right
is
there.
fascinating for me because the mint, even if you're not really infusing the port with it, there's so much perfume in the glass that when you put the port in your mouth, you're sucking in the mint through your nose. It's a sort of a flavor explosion in your head.
Mint is, mint's an interesting ingredient in the age of the mojito, because now people are going to say, well, that's kind of like a mojito with port, isn't it? No, it's not. It's got mint in it. But the magic of mint is that it's such a powerful ingredient, even as a garnish, because a quick hit, a little knock on the side to open up the veins of those leaves a little bit, and the mint just explodes out. And again, like you said, so you've got the beauty and richness of the port, of the Founders Reserve. A little bit of citrus just to kind of augment that a little bit, and then some nice fresh mint. I mean,
Freshens it up, adds a layer of aromatic complexity.
light, bright. I don't know, light, bright.
Light, bright.
Which was
love
a
it.
game when
You
I was
love it?
growing
I love
up.
it.
Light, bright with a.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
I love
The
it.
tiny little pieces that went everywhere. That was an awesome toy.
I can sing the commercial if you want.
We'll do that at the
We'll
end.
save that for
we
the
will
end.
film that at the end. But this is not the limit of mixing port into cocktails.
No.
You can get a little bit fancier.
We can get way fancy.
We're
Let's
gonna
do a
get way
couple of
fancy.
things. Well, let's
George, did you ever think that port cocktails would stage a comeback?
I always hoped to. I always hoped they would.
You were an avid consumer and advocate for.
We've been let's say advocating this, if you want, since the '60s when Sandeman introduced a white port and tonic, which was a cocktail at the time, and basically anybody that takes port understands that the flavors can become cocktail ingredient.
Absolutely.
And be part of a more interesting drink than just drinking port on its own. Although that's an interesting drink, but it's fantastic. It's fabulous.
Absolutely.
And I love the way that you produced this. I've never seen it done that way.
Come on,
I
George.
think
Fabulous.
it's great. No, seriously.
You're
I
too
think
kind,
that was,
sir.
it was
Greatest
absolutely-
performance ever.
Absolutely
So back-
fantastic.
back to the
Can
60s.
steal that one.
Back to the
Please, steal that. It's
60s.
yours.
60s cocktails. They're sort of like the.
Where are you going with this, Greg?
I'm going with a
Okay,
martini.
never mind. Sorry. Okay. The martini.
I'm asking you out. 60s cocktails. You want to go in the corner later?
Excuse me.
George, get back here.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I want to grab this glass.
It's all three of us. So,
We are a team. El equipo.
little bit of teeny action.
Teeny. All right, so we'll go teeny. We're going to take it down teeny lane. Now, the martini is, it really is the iconic classic cocktail. So it really, the basis of it is strong spirit gin is where it comes from, a little bit of vermouth, served up in a glass. Now, here is the genesis of many, many things teeny. The classic cocktail glass, as it's truly called, but what do we all call that?
That's a martini.
That's a martini glass, for goodness sakes. And
Medium-sized martini glass.
that's a medium? Uh-oh. Greg, you just announced a few things to the world, intentional or unintentional. You like a big drink.
I actually don't. I like a small martini.
I do too.
Stays nice and cold.
Stays nice and cold, it's crisp, it's bright, it's ready to go. Now, so the thing about that glass is you can put something in that glass and call it teeny. It's legal then.
Anything.
As long as it's in that glass.
You can put it in the glass.
There will be no flag thrown.
I see.
No illegal procedure.
I'm looking for a cherry to put in there. Make a cherry teeny.
Anyway, I I'm not necessarily a fan of just calling something a teeny, but tawny teeny, it's too good to pass up.
Tawny teeny.
It's too good to pass up. So here we go, the tawny teeny. We're going to take a little bit of the 20-year tawny, just a beautiful. I mean, again, on its own, there's so much going on in this glass. It's
super complex.
Super complex. So what are you going to do? I ask you, what are you going to do, Greg?
What are you going to add? You're going to add a layer.
You're going to add another layer.
Add a layer.
Keep it relatively straightforward. So grab another great ingredient. You want to take it to when you're taking it to blended Scotchtown. Where are you going to go? You're going to go to Chivas.
Chivas.
Because
Chivas layers of Chivas. Chivisry.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you just
did
that just happen? All right. So we're going to get a little Chivas in there.
So what do we got? We got four fingers of tawny and a finger of Chivas.
Always measuring fingers.
Everybody's got them.
I mean, that's my motto. If you have to have a motto,
measuring fingers.
Measuring fingers.
We do it this way also, just to make it entirely certain. It's this way.
As luck would have it, I left my spoon in the car. But through the magic of television, I'm going to use my peeler, and I'm going to stir with it because you can't be afraid to improvise. This is magical.
I mean, that's part of the beauty of cocktails. Improvisation leads to inspiration.
Well,
yes.
I mean, there's a lot of things I'm doing wrong here. I'm stirring with a peeler. Oh, thank you.
And we got a spoon.
And a spoon shows up. I mean, I'm stirring with crushed ice. There's, you can call me out on any number of things. Please don't.
I will not.
Please don't start writing in. That's not necessary. All right. So we stir that up real nicely, real nicely, and then Here, I'm doing something else wrong. I'm using a Hawthorne strainer on a glass. Don't do that. Any bartenders in the audience know that I'm just breaking rule after rule.
This is home bartending.
Yeah, we're just improvising.
This is just
I spent many a summer working at beach-style bars where you're essentially being set up with a big bin of ice, a whole stack of cups, and whatever booze and juice they choose to throw at you. And then people will come up and ask for everything.
I've probably been your client there.
You have been that was you.
That was me.
That was you.
I had a different haircut.
So
that's back when I had a mohawk.
So what you learn to do in those situations is just make the damn drink. Don't play around with it too late. Almost done. We stirred it. Now we're going to do a little
shave off some zest with the spoon.
A little pretty peel of my spoon. Yeah, this is the best spoon in the world. It's the most versatile spoon you'll ever see. So we'll get a little bit of orange oil in there.
And you guys can't see it, but you can see the impact of the orange oil on the surface of the teeny. You can see it. The surface has a little oil slick on there, a little orange oil slick. Absolutely fabulous. Really aromatic.
Yes. So I mean, again, you're taking kind of for me the basics of making great simple drinks is take great ingredients and put them together, and try to do that in as minimal a way as you can.
So you let each ingredient express itself.
Absolutely, and
they
again,
have to speak.
If you're talking about two ingredients such as the amazing port like the 20-year tawny and beautiful blended Scotch like Chivas, you don't need to do a lot else with them. That's not to say that's the only thing you could do, but what a great opportunity to let them shine.
That's very cool because it starts out very orangey. And then you get the Chivas in the middle, and then the tawny sort of carries the whole thing through the end, and it drags some of the orange through, and it drags the Chivas through. So, very nice.
Dragging it. And then, we have something else that we made.
So here's...
This is a big pitcher.
Big pitcher.
You're saying, what's in that big pitcher?
Black stuff.
You're saying, what's in that
big pitcher?
Funny you should ask, Greg, because I'm about to tell you.
Oh.
That's a little something we like to call sangria.
Sangria. So what is that? What is that sangria stuff?
Sangria. Well, sangria is one of the oldest beverages in the world. And what you're doing is you're taking wine and you're taking different types of ingredients and you're putting them all together in a beautiful collection. So what we have here is one version of sangria that we've made with the Founders Reserve port, with some like fresh margarita mix, lemons and limes, and maybe a little bit of sweet, some orange juice, and a little bit of grenadine or pomegranate, and again, just allowing all those flavors to kind of come together. You can find recipes. I know that the Snoothadmin team has put a lot of time putting together.
What's the Facebook page for Snoothadmin?
I was just saying, why
you getting there?
Greg?
I'm sorry. I get into a groove.
The Snoothadmin team has spent a lot of time putting together a Facebook page.
Did they?
They did. Now you made it look like I wasn't going to say it, Greg. I'm disappointed. So if you go to Facebook, it's Snoothadmin Porto at Facebook, and it's beautiful. There's a whole page of recipes and things like that, and you can keep up to date with what's going on with the Snoothadmin team. So there's a whole bunch of summer sangria recipes on there that I was just checking out. And the great thing about sangria is what? Talk about improvisation. You can do whatever you want with sangria.
What you got? Strawberry, mango.
Get some fresh ingredients in there. Get some seasonal stuff. If you've got fruit, put it in. If you don't, find some juice. If you've got a little bit of, if you want to get some strong spirit in there with your wine, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. So many things that you can do with sangria.
It's endless.
I mean, it's kind of like the Bloody Mary. If you walk into a bar and ask who makes the best Bloody Mary, and the bar doesn't say, doesn't say with pride, I make the best Bloody Mary, to have a beer or something there like that.
Martini.
So I mean, it's the same kind of thing with sangria. You want to own it. You want to make it your own sangria. Get involved with it. Play around with it, because eventually you'll find something that you really like. But the reason that port is so nice is again, it's got the depth and the complexity and the richness to carry the flavor. I mean, you want all that, so you don't want it to get covered up by the ingredients and have it get dulled down by juices and things like that. You need to have something that's going to be, to carry that.
Juices. So we're getting prompts from everywhere that George has a favorite cocktail. What is your favorite cocktail?
I thought the prompt was give me a drink.
Well, you have to ask. You have to ask.
I have to ask. Okay.
The sangria. So what's your favorite port cocktail?
I really like this 20-year-old
Tony Tini.
Tony Tini.
Why don't
But
we
I'm
just-
going to drink the sangria.
You can have the Tony Tini.
The Tony Tini.
I have one in each hand.
Whoa! Now we're talking.
If you think we're going to start drinking and leave me out of it, well, you just don't know me.
I got to tell you, this is nice.
All right, so we're going to do a little sangria for.
Can you taste
Greg's
this?
got.
I'll
Greg's
take
going
that.
back to the source.
All right.
Really?
Here. I don't know why.
See what happened? I got you back to your Tony Tini.
There you
I
go.
knew what you really wanted. Come
So,
on, Greg.
gentlemen,
Cheers,
Gentlemen.
and cheers.
thank you so much
Cheers.
for joining us here in New Orleans.
you.
I mean, honestly, truly, it's an honor to not only be working with these great great wines. An honor to be here with you, but to have George here and the history and the heritage.
It's my privilege
of
and my
you.
honor
No, it's
to
my
be here with
privilege.
you. And no, it's my privilege.
It's my
No,
privilege.
really,
It's
it's
my
not.
honor.
Seriously, it's my
It's
privilege.
my
No,
honor.
it's my honor.
I've
It's my
never had
honor.
an honor like
Seriously.
this before.
Say goodnight,
I've never
Gracie.
been this honored.
So
I've
this
never
is,
been this
I
honored.
cannot think of a better place to do this. I've lived here. This is a town where drinking is an art, making cocktails is an art, and I think that this whole discussion just weaves into the fabric of life in New Orleans. Take it a little slower. Wow. Don't worry if things go wrong. Make the best of everything and enjoy yourself.
I'm this close to crying, Greg. I'm not going to lie. That was deep and meaningful.
That is deep and meaningful. And on
Cheers.
that note, let's
Seriously.
do something a
Cheers.
little less deep. Cheers.
Let's drink.
Cheers. Too nice.